assaults you, you want something done about it. But essentially right now, because those have been pushed to such low levels, there's not really a punishment. And what's really frustrating for a lot of those small businesses is that they see those same people over and over again, and they don't know what to do about it. So I don't blame them for being frustrated, for their trust being frayed, and honestly, law enforcement has very few tools. That is a big problem. We tried to get the county to apply for a Prop 47 grant to bring in $2 million a year for 3 years. They didn't want to do it. Some of the monies that are coming in are coming to the county, but they're being used for other things. The city has our 3 main general fund departments: a parks department, a police department, and a fire department. That's what property taxes and sales taxes cover. We've extended now to build our homelessness investments. We've extended now to invest in youth and front-load equity programs through Measure U, and we're working on housing now. But we can't do it all. We have to find ways to be more effective and more efficient through our partners, but ultimately, this is a matter of whether or not there should be a consequence for doing something wrong. I think there should be. I just don't think the system right now is geared up to help those people. For instance, before, you could get into mental health court because the court could mandate that. You could get into drug court because now those processes aren't happening. People aren't ending up in the places they need help, and they don't seem to want the help if they're not made to take it.
We're going to move on to Measure U. Measure U. Sacramento's voter-approved Measure U sales tax accounts for more or about, depending on the year you're looking at, $100 million a year in city funds to be used for general municipal purposes. Steve, we'll start with you. If elected, how will you make sure Measure U funds are being used to provide more programs and services to underserved parts of District 4?
The original Measure U, the half-cent that was approved in 2012, was to restore services. When it came up for renewal in 2018, there was a lot of different needs on the table, and we realized that if we only did the half-cent, we wouldn't have the ability to invest in housing and homelessness and equity and those other things. So the voters, in your wisdom, decided to approve Measure U as a full cent. My opponent didn't support Measure U, and in fact said on Monday at the editorial board, we'd be better off without Measure U. But I believe that those positions in the library, in the parks department, in the fire department, in the police department, those are good. But what we've done is we've built upon that through this affordable housing bond we're working on. We're working on a city facilities bond to reinvest in pools and parks like William Land Park, into new bathrooms, into other things that people are asking for. But we're also setting aside a large portion of that for economic equity. And when I talked about youth riding for free on transit, that was Measure U dollars at work. We put money into regional transit to ensure that all people under 18 could ride transit for free. And look what's happening. Now young people have a mobility option they didn't have before. Parents have a mobility option they didn't have before. And those investments are being leveraged. And I think Measure U, without it, the city might be bankrupt because of the failure of CalPERS to get a return on investment, and because we wouldn't have the necessary resources not only to invest in the opportunities and fight these challenges, but we wouldn't have a lot of our own workers.
Using Measure U money in District 4.
Yeah, so Measure U is less than 10% of our budget. And when it was up last summer, or gosh, a year and a half ago summer now, sorry, I'm still getting used to 2020, and we asked them for accountability for how that money would be used. Because by the time they got to the point where they were putting that on the ballot, they had promised that money 5 times over. And we said, okay, we value affordable housing, we value services, we value all of this, but what's the accountability that we're going to build into this process to ensure that that's where the money actually goes? And by the way, what are we doing with the rest of the money? How do we know that the whole budget is aligning with our values? Because this is just such a small sliver, we are entitled to understand how the rest of the money is aligning with our values beyond that small sliver. But I also do want to point out to the comment that my opponent just raised when I said to the board that we'd be better off without Measure U. And the reason I said that is because the sales tax is an incredibly regressive tax. It hits everybody the same way. And really right now, when you're a young professional like me and you're struggling to pay rent in the central city and you're struggling to afford your bills and you're struggling to get by on transit and deal with parking tickets and enforcement and all of that, that extra sales tax matters to your bill. And without the accountability for the rest of the budget, we saw it just 3 months later, the bill, it was passed and suddenly we were in this food fight, over $40 million. And I kept saying, what about the rest of the money? Where's the rest of the money going? What about that developer fee money that was supposed to pay for affordable housing? What about all of the other promises that have been made
guess what? I agree. And that's why I passed a charter amendment to give our city auditor protection by becoming a charter officer. That was passed by the voters. I passed fiscal policies just last year to constrain our debt, to make sure that we were being smart. But if we don't have those resources, and you want to know where the money's spent, look at the number of people that the city has hired over the last few years. It's going into salary and benefits for our employees who are cleaning up our parks, who are out patrolling our streets, or when you want an ambulance, it's those folks that money is going to. We have a lot of things we've got to fix. We need new fire stations, we need new libraries. It has to come from somewhere, but guess what? We are being extremely responsible. Yes, we're going to fight. That's the nature of the council. People have things they care about. They want to see their aspirations met. But we ultimately came to a unanimous decision because I created a budget framework that helped everybody get what they needed.
I'm really glad to hear that you agree with me now because you didn't a year and a half ago. And I think really when I look at the budget, I don't know if you've actually ever tried to figure out where budget money goes by council district. Have any of you ever asked this question? Like, hey, can you just break out where general fund money goes by council district? They can't. When you look at the way they budget right now, you have to go through this, like these weird, they call them PODs for each department, and you're looking for different things, and sometimes it's a sentence that says, here's $1 million, and it's gonna go to special projects like the riverfront, and that's it. And you're like, oh, okay, but like, what about the riverfront? Is it gonna build housing? Is it gonna go for planning? What is this? You know, our city manager's budget alone has gone from $3 million to $11 million just in the last 5 years. These are questions that we deserve to have answers to before we tax the working people of the city more than we've already done.
Sure have.
It's easy to pick these numbers. We are one city. The police officers that might work in one part of the city move from district to district. Firefighters move from district to district. Park workers move from district to district. It's great to say let's divide it by district, but we don't want an us versus them mentality in how we build a city for everyone. And the last thing I'd say is ultimately, we have been responding to the public's demands to invest in small businesses. That city manager budget includes money for economic development staff to work with small businesses. And we just launched grants last week to help those very same small businesses scale up. We're doing a lot of different things to invest in our economy, and I think it's easy to pick at the budget because nobody really likes a budget. Everybody feels like you have to make really difficult choices. You'd like to do the fun things, but you got to do the necessary things first. And almost all of our budget is spent on the necessary, like CalPERS. CalPERS, because of their deficiencies over the last decade in getting returns, has increased their demands on the city by $66 million. That is money that could be going elsewhere, but we cannot do anything but pay that debt.
I would like to understand how necessary $27 million was for a soccer stadium.
Yeah.
Crosswalks on Somerville Road, and we have basic, essential things that I consider necessary to a city not happening, and we're being told there's no money for this. But then magically we can find $40 million to invest in the riverfront or $27 million for the rail yard. This trickle-down economics theory that doesn't benefit working families, it benefits millionaire developers. How essential is that?
So first of all, Sutterville and Meade, last night, Talon and Kevin Wong were at the council because we were getting the $100,000 design and preliminary engineering funded. We are working to fund that because it is a priority to me. I have spent numerous hours not only advancing policies like Vision Zero, but blocking and tackling to get the funding for important projects. And so it's easy to pick on MLS and the rail yards where we've waited 100 years to redevelop. We had to remediate. But hold on, I don't want to waste my time. The only money that's there is produced by the actual thing that's being built. It's an enhanced infrastructure financing district. And that is money generated by that development to pay for roads, to pay for sewers, to pay for public things. We didn't use the general fund to pay for that. We didn't use any other tax dollars. This is trying to leverage the investment of that project to do more. And it's easy to nitpick the waterfront from the hotel tax, but guess what? It creates jobs for our hotel workers, it creates jobs for our restaurant workers, and I think that's important.
We can't afford to live
Before
here.
Sacramento is a city on the rise. More people who work in District 4 are choosing to live here rather than in the suburbs. What do you believe is a reasonable balance between affordable and market rate housing in order to meet the future needs of the area?
Thank you. My opponent and I disagree on a certain data point that I found on the state's housing website, which was that we actually have an oversupply of higher income units for people in the rental market right now and an undersupply of the lower income units. And so when we're talking about building housing, we have to build housing for the workers and the people that we know are going to need to be here. And like I said, in 2012, we knew back then that 10% of our units were going to be extremely low income. And we had benchmarks for each other income set, and we haven't been making that because we've removed the requirements for developers to build mixed income units into their developments. And that's a big deal. That was a big incentive for people. It wasn't perfect. It was far from perfect, but it was something that we had. Right now, you have a developer who can quad divide a parcel and sell each unit for $800,000. And there's nothing that stops them from doing that. They might pay a little bit in developer fees, but that's it. And that's never going to be enough for us to meet the housing mix. And so for me, we need to focus on where the gap is. And the gap is not in market rate. The gap is in rates of housing that workers and minimum wage folks and people on SSI in our city can afford.
Hear, hear.
When we lost the redevelopment affordable housing money, we lost all of the resources we had to subsidize those units. A subsidized affordable housing unit for extremely low income folks can cost as much as $500,000 each. When we talk about developers subdividing a lot, the developers in our district that are subdividing a parcel like that look like the people in this room. People who've decided they want to contribute, they have an empty lot, or maybe the back half of their lot because they have an alley, and they want to build a unit to help somebody. And maybe that is expensive, but guess what? If we subsidize that, we won't have the money, first of all, but it changes the whole, the ultimate ability to do bigger projects like the warehouse artist office and those things, and we've focused largely on those. But the cost to do housing is so much. Sacramento is barely able to finance our housing construction that we have right now. In the 1950s, we had twice the population on the grid as we had in the early 90s, and we've slowly rebuilt that. We've slowly rebuilt that. Those empty parcels that sat fallow for 30 years, 40 years, Lavender Courtyard is going to go up on one of those. It's an affordable housing project for LGBT seniors that Rachel Iska over here championed, and we worked so closely on. Even though neighbors didn't like it because they didn't want those people in our neighborhood, they protested at my movie night with no on Section 8 flyers. We were building that because that is an important part of it. So we're not just doing one thing, we're doing all the things. And we're trying as best we can to achieve all of those goals. But we're not a socialist society yet. We're still a capitalist society, and we need market rate housing to meet that need.
Katie, you want to respond?
Yeah, you're right. We're never going to have enough public money to build the units, which is why I'm talking about requiring developers to do the right thing for the communities that they're going to get to. But I also think that there's a lot of innovation that we've been trying to get the city to embrace that would reduce that subsidy. So the Sacramento Community Land Trust essentially operates, you pull a parcel out of the market and you just preserve affordability simply because you don't have to subsidize that market price. It never goes back out into the market. It goes to the next person that needs that affordable unit and so on and so forth. And that's just one of many strategies that we've been trying to do. We've been trying to talk about tiny homes in the city for 10 years. We've been trying to talk about modular home development for 10 years. I remember talking to Scott Syfax at Nehemiah, and he's like, if I could just get the city to work with me on a lot, I think I can reduce the cost if I could start experimenting with different ways of building. And that's been a decade that we've been waiting for this. And I'm glad the city's talking about it now, but imagine what we could have done in the city if we've been bold back then.
So ADUs are small units, garages that are converted, basements that are converted into a separate unit. And I led the charge of their city council to make those by right, to make sure you didn't need to have separate water service, separate trash cans, so that homeowners didn't have to pay fees on those units. Those are the kind of infill units that are really successful. I'm all for a tiny home project. I'm all for modular construction. We've seen modular construction at Aviva. I'm actually going to Factory OS, which is run in Mare Island in the Bay Area, and they're doing this modular housing. It sometimes, though, can be more complicated than building ground up, and we need to do all of these things. There's no one silver bullet on housing, and if you put requirements on market rate developers to build affordable housing in their buildings, they are likely not to build anything. And that's just the sad fact of our economy here in Sacramento. If we were the Bay Area and we had tech billions, we could add all those requirements, but guess what? They're not building as much as they need to there either. For every job they create, they're building almost no housing.
Okay, let's move on to this next topic, transportation. First question, first opportunity to respond will be